Hi, I'm Alicia Bodecker, and this is my speech to inform on Titanic. Imagine boarding the largest, most luxurious ship ever built, completely confident she's unsinkable, only to realize it was a total hoax as she sinks right beneath you on her first ever voyage. Taking 3 years and 2 days to build, Titanic was the largest ship of her time. By April of 1912, she was fully equipped and had the most lifeboats of any vessel at the time, which will be important later. She even completed sea trials prior to departing from Southampton, England on April 12, 1912, and was aiming to arrive in New York City in just 5 days by April 17th. However, she only made it just over 4 days at sea on her ill-fated voyage before sinking on the cold and unapologetic night of April 14th into the morning of April 15th, 1912, after blindly striking an iceberg. The sinking of the Titanic was a devastating tragedy that not only claimed the lives of over half of its passengers, but also exposed critical human errors and led to lasting changes in maritime safety. This event reminds us of the real cost of poor preparation and overconfidence at sea. First of all, I want to discuss the devastating effects of those on board. The scale of the tragedy was absolutely massive, claiming over 1,500 deaths of the total 2,224 overall passengers. That is so many. Totally insane. Over half of the passengers succumbed to the sinking. There were several personal stories of survivors, but I'm going to sink in on Carlos Hurd, who was a Carpathia passenger at the time of the sinking. Carpathia was also boarding on its voyage across the North Atlantic at the same time as Titanic. And Carlos Hurd awoke on the morning of April 15th and felt a very strange feeling. He made his way to the dining room where he saw a group of refugees who were shivering and frankly traumatized. And one of Carpathia's crew members pointed to the group and said, "From Titanic, she's at the bottom of the ocean." Carlos Hurd made his way outside the deck and saw several other lifeboats bringing many survivors from Titanic. He grabbed as many scraps of paper as he could and took interviews of every single survivor. Out of the survivors, there were 706, mainly consisting of women and children, immigrants who lost their life savings, and people who could not speak English. Carlos Hurd took account of all various and sometimes contradictory accounts of the disaster. He wrote that the music played as the Titanic descended, screaming, groans of death, the beauty of the stars in the pitch black night sky, explosions, four that were definitely there, and twisting and creaking of the ship's bow, and even the sight of the ship breaking in half. So scary, I couldn't imagine. Although the numbers are striking, the tragedy itself is far more bewildering as we examine the human errors and decisions that contributed to it. These are some newspaper clippings I'm going to be using as a visual aid from right after the sinking that were published. If you can see those. Just going to leave them up for a second. I apologize for the words. I'm not really sure how they're going to look on frame. Next, the mistakes and misjudgments that led to the sinking of Titanic. Overconfidence in the ship's design was a huge flaw that was extremely overlooked because of the belief that it was unsinkable, which is just not true. Captain Edward Smith, who was the commander of Titanic, was the most experienced captain of White Star Line at the time. Talking about his experience during a press interview in 1907, he claimed, "I have never been in an accident of any sort worth speaking about, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in any disaster of any sort. I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that." According to White Star Line logs, Captain Smith's experience prior to 1911 was based on ships under 24,000 tons. Titanic and its sister ship Olympic were over 45,000-ton ships that he had never, ever experimented with. There were several critical errors that caused the Titanic to founder, including the lack of lifeboats, the ignored iceberg warnings, and lack of communication. The original plan of the ship's design included 48 lifeboats, which would have been sufficient for all 2,224 passengers. However, J. Bruce Ismay, who was the chairman of White Star Line, said that Titanic would be in full compliance with British Board of Trade rules with only 20 lifeboats. And Ismay believed that the additional lifeboats, the other amount that would lead up to 48, would clutter the boat deck. So they didn't include them, even though it would have saved all of its passengers on that fateful night. Titanic sailed her voyage in full compliance with legislation, barely crossing the line with 20 lifeboats, and the total lifeboat capacity was 1,176 passengers, which was less than half that boarded. The season called for Labrador Current, which was a current in the North Atlantic, still there, that pushes huge masses of ice sheets into the track that huge ships take. And it's always been that way. They knew they were there. They knew that it was that season. The waters were very icy. And they just overlooked it. By April 14th, Titanic received 7 iceberg warnings, one of which was transmitted by the ship herself. If she could have saved herself, they would have never sank. Because really, it just comes down to human error. Titanic radio operators retransmitted messages to the hydrographic office, but they failed to inform the ship's bridge, which has control over all of the warnings they send to Captain Smith, who failed to turn the boat out of the iceberg's path because they never retransmitted them to the bridge. There were no general discussions that took place among the officers, no conference was called to consider the warnings, and no heed was given to them. The speed was not relaxed of the ship, and the outlook was not increased. They just kept sailing exactly how they were, just hoping they didn't hit anything. Smith's indifference to the danger was the main cause of the founder of Titanic, and when other less pretentious vessels doubled their lookout or stopped their engines, because that's what you should do when you are unaware of what's around you. As you can see, there were many mistakes that impacted much more than the sinking of the Titanic itself, even leading to lasting changes regarding maritime safety and law. Finally, the tragedy's persisting lessons. Reforms and regulations are a huge part of this, including lifeboat protocols, iceberg monitoring, and international safety standards. SOLAS, which is the primary set and hold safety standards for merchant ships, and it was developed after the Titanic sinking in 1914, and it was not even fully adopted until 1974, which is insane. Part of SOLAS was the British and American boards of inquiry, and they decided that ships should carry lifeboats that are sufficient enough to carry every single passenger on the ship, which you would have thought was already there to begin with, but it wasn't. It also implemented required lifeboat drills and inspections to prevent another mass boat sinking accident, and ship design changes were also called, including bulkheads that were made higher so that water could not get onto them, and double hulls, which would allow the ship to be lifted out of the water a significant amount. And if one hull had, any type of damage to it, the other one would still be there to support it, which is a great design idea. And it also led to the International Ice Patrol, which was developed in 1914, and it still does alert any sea vessels traveling in the ship routes of Europe, Canada, and the United States of any icebergs, which is absolutely fantastic. It's double, safety. And today, the U.S. Coast Guard runs it. The tragedy continues to serve as a reminder of the risks faced by those aboard and the importance of proper preparation. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was created to apply lessons learned from the tragedy. It highlighted all of the failures in communication, lifeboat quantity, insufficient safety regulations, poor risk management, and the danger of overconfidence, which were all we talked about in this speech so far, and it all led to the reforms that I also just discussed. In conclusion, the Titanic disaster will forever be seen as a profound human tragedy, which was shaped by both unpredictable circumstances and preventable errors, completely preventable errors. It highlights the costs of overconfidence and why proper preparation and safety is extremely helpful. More than a chapter in your history book, the Titanic serves as a lasting reminder that even the greatest maritime innovations cannot eliminate risk, and the various lessons learned from such a tragedy can and has saved countless lives since. As a quote from one of the survivors, that the Titanic sinking marked a moment when the world woke with a start. And that is completely true. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.